Hi friends, welcome back to the Avocado Toast Budget, and today we are going to break down all of the questions that I wish I would have asked when renting my first apartment. Our first apartment that we rented together was an absolute disaster. And thankfully, because of that, we learned a lot along the way, but we also lived in hell for a year, and there are a lot of things that we have learned to ask before we sign anything or get into an apartment. Because definitely things are not always as they seem, and I think that there are some questions that are really important for you to know the answer to before you make your decision about where you want to rent. Before we get started, if you enjoy this video, make sure that you give it a big thumbs up. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm, helps boost this video to the top. That way more people can find this content. So let's go ahead and get into it. Question number one, what amenities and utilities are included? Oftentimes this is something that they advertise, but we actually learned about our apartment that all of the utilities except for electricity are included in our rent. And this is something that's really important because sometimes things like trash and water are a given and the apartment will cover it for you. And other times those are things that you are expected to cover yourself. So when you are looking at the price of the apartment, don't just look at how much is rent, look at what is included in that rent. If something like having a gym on site is going to save you from having a gym membership, then that could be something that brings a lot of value to your life and is worth paying a little bit more in rent because you've saved money by not having to pay for a gym membership and go to the gym. Also, it might be worth it to pay a little bit more in rent if most of your utilities are covered, whereas with an apartment that has cheaper rent, but you are expected to pay for water and trash and gas and electricity. And of course, this is all about whatever matters to you. Certain things like a gym or a pool might not matter to you at all, or they might really make or break your renting experience. So keep that in mind whenever I'm talking about these questions, that some of these might need to be changed a little bit, or your expectations for what the answers to these questions are going to change depending on what is important to you and what are you looking for as a renter. But ultimately, when we discovered that everything other than electricity was included in our rent, it was a really big encourager for us to decide to rent here because it was already one of the places that was less expensive to rent at. So given the fact that we didn't have to pay for things like water, trash, and gas made a huge difference. But also keep in mind what amenities are important to you because things like the pool that we have here might be a selling point to some people, but honestly, I've been to the pool once, so that's definitely not something that we would have gotten our money's worth if we decided to rent here versus somewhere that was cheaper because of the pool. However, the fact that right here in our backyard, we have our own little pond, I call it our swamp because it looks very swampy in the winter, is actually a huge benefit to us. And it's something that whenever we move, I'm gonna look for in the future because I love having that sense of having a body of water next to our apartment. It makes it feel like more like a home. Question number two, how much does rent typically go up every year? This happened to us in a very negative way with our first apartment. So our first apartment, we chose it because honestly, we didn't know what we were doing. We were moving up here on a whim and it was one of the cheapest places that we could find. However, the next year, whenever we went to go sign our contract to renew our lease, they had increased our rent by like $150, which at the time, we were paying less than $600 in rent. So that was a huge markup for the apartment that we had had and how much we had been paying. And in our experience, really, there was no reason for that. There had been no renovations done on our apartment. The maintenance turnaround was awful, and we'll get like more into all of that, but it was definitely not worth the rent increase. So when we were looking for a new apartment, that was a question that we asked and that was really important to us was how much do you typically increase rent whenever someone is looking to renew their lease? Because if you decide that you're going to live there past your 12-month lease and you're going to renew it, you want to know if you're going to be paying a lot more or if you're going to be getting a deal because you are continuing to renew your lease. So for example, we've lived in this apartment 2 years. We had just signed our third lease. The apartment has only gone up by $50 from the first time that we rented it. And for us, that is a really good deal because if you look into buying our apartment right now, you're going to pay about $250 more a month in rent than we are paying because we've been at this apartment for a few years. Sometimes, depending on your landlord and your situation, you can even negotiate where you don't have to pay any more in rent. It really just depends on your situation. In our case, our landlord is a big company. It's not just like it's one person. So there's really not a ton of room for negotiating. Trust me, I've tried. But it's really good for us to know that our rent is only going to go up by like the standard 2 to 3%, and we're not going to have a huge increase when we're expecting expecting to be renewing a lease, and then we have to start looking at other places. Question number 3 is, what is the maintenance turnaround time and what does that look like? At our first apartment, this was something that we learned to ask because they had an online maintenance system, which I thought meant that maintenance would be more efficient. But for example, and this was like not an uncommon thing to happen, our garbage disposal had broken and we had no dishwasher, and it took them 3 weeks to get to us. So for 3 weeks, we couldn't use our sink. And because we couldn't use our sink, we couldn't wash dishes, so we were pretty much having to eat out or just eat like off of plastic microwaved meals because we had no way to cook anything, and that was a huge expense for us. And it was just really annoying anytime that we had a maintenance issue, that unless it was what they considered to be an emergency, and even then they didn't do such a great job at responding to maintenance emergencies either, it took them a long time to get back to our maintenance request. So whenever we were moving into this apartment, we asked about what the typical maintenance turnaround time looked like. And actually, lucky for us, the person who was showing us the apartment, she actually lives here because they give employees discounts, and she had said that it's usually anywhere between 24 and 48 hours, and of course they can lie, but in our case she was right, and maintenance turnaround time is so much faster at this apartment. Question number 4, what is the system in place for maintenance emergencies? This is actually a question that I have from my first apartment that I rented at, because there was really no way to get a hold of anyone if you did have a true emergency, like a water leak, a gas leak, anything that like needed to be taken care of as soon as possible. And I think it's really important for them to be able to show you exactly what it's going to look like when you put in an emergency maintenance request. Here at our apartment, if it's not an emergency, you go through the online system, but they have a 24-hour call log where someone is always on the clock there to respond to maintenance emergencies, and usually it takes them like less than an hour to get over here. And when something is going wrong at 2 or 3 a.m., this is really important to have. So make sure that they can confidently answer this question and kind of walk you through what that process looks like. The 5th question that I wish I would have asked is, what appliances are included? And specifically with this question, you want to focus on appliances and amenities that matter to you. So things like central AC, a dishwasher, or an in-unit washer and dryer can all make or break an apartment depending on your situation. Our first apartment, I really didn't know anything. I didn't know to ask for these things. I was just kind of ignorant, and I thought that those things were just included in rent. I knew that sometimes like an in-unit washer and dryer wasn't, and I knew particularly with this apartment that it wouldn't be, and I had decided, like we decided we were okay with that. Looking back at that, we were not okay with that, and I wish I would have known more about what that entailed. But that's a whole other story. But things like central AC and a dishwasher weren't included in that apartment, and they were things that really affected our quality of life. If you've been on my channel at all, you know that I really struggle with depression and anxiety, and sometimes washing the dishes by hand just is not going to happen. So having a dishwasher is really important for my quality of life and my ability to be able to easily make food for myself and not have to eat out as often. We also both get very hot at night, so not having central AC was awful. And now that we have central AC, that is a huge thing for us. So those 2 things, and for us an in-unit washer and dryer, were just kind of like 3 non-negotiables that we wanted to make sure were included in the apartment that we were renting. So just know nothing is really a given, and make sure that you check with all of the important appliances and if they are included in the apartment that you're renting. Also know that an in-unit washer and dryer is different than an in-unit washer and dryer hookup. A hookup means that you need the washer and dryer, but there is a place to hook it up. An in-unit washer and dryer means that the actual washer and dryer are included. So just a little side note, I didn't know the difference between those 2 things either, so make sure that you understand the difference between those. The 6th question that I would ask is, when was the last time that the building was renovated, or when was the building built? So our first apartment was really old. It was built in the 60s. It had not been renovated since. The ceiling was falling apart. The places next to like the windows were falling apart. I really thought that the bathroom could like collapse at any minute. And even when we were checking out, the lady who went to go check out on our porch, when she went to go walk out there, I told her I never went out there because I was worried it was going to collapse. And she made a comment that she was also worried that the porch was going to collapse, and we lived on the 3rd floor. So that was something that was really important to us, and it was actually something that we didn't think to ask, but thankfully the person who was showing us the apartment had known the apartment complex we were living in before, so she made a point to mention that this apartment complex was not only built after that one and was relatively new, but it had also been re-renovated again. So that made us feel a little bit better about like the quality of the actual building we were living in, and for us has truly made a really big difference about the quality of life that we have inside of this apartment. Even though maintenance turnaround time is so much better here, we don't have nearly as many maintenance calls as we had at that apartment, and we've lived here for twice as long. Again, an older building doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have all those problems. That apartment, obviously there was a lot going on, but I do think that it might be something to kind of keep in mind, especially if you're in an apartment situation where you're only seeing a model and you can't see the actual apartment until you move in. That is the situation with our apartment, so we wanted to make it really clear that the building itself was going to look a lot like the model, and the model wasn't going to be this amazing model and then the apartment itself was actually really run down. And knowing when the building is built can give you a really good look into this. Part of renting is the fact that you are paying more because someone else is taking care of things like renovations and maintenance, so you want to make sure that they're actually putting your money to good use. Like I said, the first apartment that we rented from, they were going to increase our rent so much, but they hadn't done anything to justify that rent increase. So that is it for today's video. Honestly, I have so many other questions that I could talk to you guys about and things that we learned along the way of having an awful renter's experience to a pretty good one. So if you want to see more videos like this, let me know. Definitely let me know down in the comments if you have any other questions that you always make sure to ask. Let us know. That way we can learn from you as well. And if you enjoyed this video or you learned something cool, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm, helps boost this video to the top. That way more people can find this content. And I will see you all next time.